The Simpsons has been on the air since December 17th, 1989, over 35 seasons, more than 770 episodes. And in that time, this little yellow family from Springfield has quietly produced some of the darkest, most emotionally devastating moments in the entire history of animation. We're not talking about Treehouse of Horror stuff. We're talking about real, canonical, in-universe moments where characters get destroyed, psychologically broken, or fundamentally changed forever. Tonight, we're going through the worst moment of every single major character in The Simpsons. Grab your blanket, get comfortable, and settle in. Because this is going to take a while. Let's start with the man himself, Homer J. Simpson. Now, Homer has done a lot of terrible things over the course of 35 seasons. He's strangled his son more times than anyone can count. He's caused meltdowns at the nuclear plant. He's accidentally started riots, destroyed property, and generally been a menace to the entire town of Springfield. But his absolute worst moment, the one that fans and critics keep coming back to as the darkest thing he's ever been responsible for, comes from Season 8, Episode 23, Homer's Enemy. It first aired on May 4th, 1997. It was written by John Swartzwelder and directed by Jim Reardon. And to this day, it holds the highest IMDb rating of any Simpsons episode ever made, a 9.3 out of 10. The episode opens with a news report by Kent Brockman about a man named Frank Grimes. And Frank's backstory is the kind of thing that makes you wonder if the universe has a personal grudge against certain people. He was abandoned by his parents at age 4, never got to go to school, spent his childhood as a delivery boy, carrying toys to other kids who actually had families. On his 18th birthday, he was blown up in a silo explosion. During his long, painful recovery, he had to teach himself to hear again and to feel pain again. And through all of that, every single day, Frank Grimes used his few spare moments to study science by mail. He worked and suffered and scraped his way through life until finally he earned a correspondence school diploma in nuclear physics, with a minor in determination. Mr. Burns sees this news report and is genuinely moved. He tells Smithers to bring Frank Grimes to the plant and make him executive vice president. Smithers does as he's told. But by the next morning, Burns has completely forgotten about it and given the VP job to a heroic dog he saw on television. Frank Grimes gets reassigned to a low-level position in Sector 7G, which means his desk is right next to Homer Simpson. Now think about this from Frank's perspective. He spent his entire life fighting for every single thing he has, every meal, every dollar, every achievement earned through blood and pain and discipline. And sitting next to him is Homer Simpson, a man who sleeps at his desk, who eats donuts with his mouth open, who somehow holds the title of safety inspector at a nuclear power plant despite having zero qualifications and apparently zero interest in doing his job. Frank is horrified, and honestly, who wouldn't be? When Homer nearly drinks a beaker of sulfuric acid and Frank knocks it out of his hand to save his life, the acid damages the cafeteria wall. Burns punishes Frank for the damage, not Homer, who was the one playing with acid. Frank, the guy who prevented a disaster. That's when Frank snaps. He declares himself Homer's enemy. He tells Homer directly that he hates him. And Homer's response is pure, oblivious Homer. He goes home genuinely upset, not because someone hates him, but because he can't understand why anyone would. Marge tells him that Frank doesn't really hate him. She says Frank is probably just frustrated because life has always been hard for him while it's been so easy for Homer. And Homer, in a brief moment of actual emotional intelligence, decides to invite Frank over for dinner to smooth things out. The dinner scene is where the episode gets genuinely uncomfortable. Homer has Marge prepare a lobster dinner. The family dresses up in their Sunday best. And Frank walks into a beautiful 2-story house with a loving wife, 3 kids, a 2-car garage, and lobster on the table. He looks around at this life that Homer Simpson has somehow stumbled into, and he just loses it. Not violently. Worse. He starts listing everything Homer has that he doesn't deserve. a beautiful wife, a dream house, a son who owns a factory. Homer has been to space. He won a Grammy. He went on tour with the Smashing Pumpkins. He's friends with the former president of the United States. Meanwhile, Frank Grimes lives in a single-room apartment between two bowling alleys. Frank says something that night that cuts right to the bone. He tells Homer that if he had lived in any other country in the world, he would have starved to death long ago. That people like Homer are what's wrong with America, doing as little as possible while leeching off the hard work of people like Frank. He says this to Homer's face in Homer's dining room after eating Homer's lobster. And the worst part is that he's not wrong. Everything Frank says about Homer is objectively true. Homer is dangerously incompetent. Homer hasn't earned any of his incredible life experiences. And the system that rewards Homer while punishing Frank is fundamentally broken. But being right doesn't save Frank Grimes. Nothing can. Frank hatches a plan to publicly humiliate Homer. He tricks Homer into entering a design-your-own power plant contest by removing the parts of the flyer that indicate it's for children. Frank's thinking is simple. Homer will submit something embarrassingly stupid. The whole plant will see what an idiot he is. And finally, someone will acknowledge that this man should not be working in a nuclear facility. Homer enters the contest. His submission is a crude model of the existing power plant, but with fins added to lower wind resistance and a racing stripe painted on the side. It looks like something a 6-year-old would build, which is exactly the point because the contest is for children. Ralph Wiggum entered a Malibu Stacy dream house. Martin Prince built a working model that was actually generating electricity for the auditorium. Homer wins first prize. Mr. Burns personally congratulates him. The entire room gives Homer a standing ovation. Frank Grimes watches this happen, and something breaks inside him that can never be repaired. He starts screaming that the plant is insane. He runs through the hallways, declaring himself to be Homer Simpson, mocking Homer's habits, eating like a slob, announcing he doesn't need safety protocols. He rushes into a room with extremely high voltage equipment. He sees a warning sign that says, "Danger, high voltage." And he grabs the wires with both hands. "I don't need safety gloves," he says, "because I'm Homer Simp." He's dead before he can finish the sentence, electrocuted instantly. And then comes the funeral, the scene that producer George Meyer later described with chilling honesty. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that Frank Grimes said things that needed to be said, but once they were said, they needed to destroy that person. He admitted they took a certain sadistic glee in Grimes' downfall. At the funeral, Reverend Lovejoy is delivering the eulogy. He's talking about how Frank Grimes taught everyone that a man can triumph over adversity, and how even though Frank's agonizing struggle through life was tragically cut short, he's surely looking down from heaven. And right in the middle of this solemn moment, Homer falls asleep in the pew. He starts talking in his sleep. "Change channel, Marge." The entire congregation laughs. They laugh at Frank Grimes' funeral because Homer Simpson fell asleep. And the casket is lowered into the ground while everyone is still chuckling. That's it. That's the final image. A man who worked harder than anyone in Springfield, who earned every single thing he ever had, who was objectively correct about every criticism he ever made, dies because the world he lives in rewards stupidity over merit. And at his funeral, the man who drove him to his death gets the biggest laugh in the room. The show's executive producer Josh Weinstein later said he regretted killing Frank after just one episode because he was such an amazing character. The episode's writer, John Swartzwelder, listed it among his personal favorites. And the idea behind it, according to the producers, was to take a realistic person, someone from outside the Simpsons cartoon logic, and drop them into Homer's world to see what would happen. The answer is that reality can't survive in Springfield. The person who sees the world clearly is the one who gets destroyed. That's Homer's worst moment. Not because he meant to hurt anyone, he never does. Homer's greatest sin has always been his complete inability to understand the consequences of his own existence. He doesn't know he's ruining lives. He doesn't know he's hoarding privilege he didn't earn. He's not malicious. He's something worse. He's oblivious. And in the world of The Simpsons, that obliviousness is a weapon that kills the only honest man in Springfield. Homer's obliviousness destroyed a man who did everything right and still lost. But if you think that's the worst thing to happen in Springfield, wait until you hear what Homer accidentally did to his own neighbor's wife, and why one of television's sweetest characters had to bury the love of his life because of a t-shirt cannon. Ned Flanders is the nicest man in Springfield, possibly the nicest man in all of animated television. He volunteers at church. He raises his boys with genuine love and patience. He bakes pies for neighbors who don't even like him. He says okily dokily without a shred of irony. He's so relentlessly positive that it actually makes Homer angry, which is impressive because Homer gets angry at very few things that don't involve food. But on February 13th, 2000, the show aired Season 11, Episode 14, Alone Again, Natura Diddly. And Ned Flanders' life was ripped apart in the most random, senseless, Homer-caused way imaginable. The setup is simple. The Simpsons and the Flanders are at the Springfield Speedway watching a stock car race. Between laps, cheerleaders come out with t-shirt cannons to fire free shirts into the crowd. Homer, being Homer, stands up and starts yelling at the cheerleaders to aim at him. He's waving his arms, screaming, making a complete spectacle of himself because he wants a free t-shirt. The cheerleaders take aim and fire, and at that exact moment, Homer bends over. Some versions of the story say he was picking something up. Others say he was reaching for food he'd dropped. Either way, the t-shirts sail right over his head. They fly past him, and they slam directly into Maude Flanders, who's sitting in the row behind Homer, up high in the bleachers. The impact knocks Maude backward. She goes over the railing, and she falls to her death. And here's the detail that makes this so much worse. Homer had parked in the ambulance zone. His car was blocking the space where emergency vehicles were supposed to be stationed. So even if paramedics could have reached Maude in time, they couldn't get close enough because Homer's car was in the way. Maude Flanders, wife, mother, church volunteer, killed by t-shirts that were aimed at Homer because Homer asked for them to be aimed at him. And the ambulance that might have saved her couldn't get through because Homer parked illegally. The aftermath is genuinely hard to watch. Ned, the man who thanks God for everything, who sees the hand of the Lord in every sunrise and every cup of cocoa, has to stand at his wife's grave and try to make sense of a universe that took Maude from him because of a t-shirt cannon at a stock car race. He nearly misses church for the first time in his life. He struggles to function as a single parent to Rod and Todd, two boys who need their mother and don't understand why she's gone. The community rallies around him, but the usual Simpsons comedy feels hollow in these scenes. Even Homer seems to understand on some level that something terrible happened because of him. Though of course Homer being Homer, that understanding fades pretty quickly. Behind the scenes, the reason Maude was killed off had nothing to do with the story the writers wanted to tell. Voice actress Maggie Roswell had left the show over a pay dispute. She was flying from her home in Denver to Los Angeles to record her lines, and the cost of travel was eating into her salary. When negotiations broke down, the producers decided to write Maude out of the show permanently. They chose to kill her rather than recast her because they wanted the death to have weight, and it did. Maude's death fundamentally altered Ned's character arc for the rest of the series. He eventually married Edna Krabappel, but when Edna's voice actress Marsha Wallace passed away in real life in 2013, that character was retired too. Ned Flanders lost two wives, the nicest man in Springfield, cursed by forces entirely outside his control. The episode does end on a slightly hopeful note. Ned meets Rachel Jordan, the lead singer of a Christian rock band, at a support group. There's a suggestion that maybe, eventually, Ned can find love again. But Maude's death hangs over the entire series from that point forward. Every time Ned is shown in later seasons, every time he's at church or tucking Rod and Todd into bed, There's this invisible weight. The empty chair at the dinner table, the mother who should be there but isn't, all because Homer wanted a t-shirt. Now, if Ned represents the tragedy of a good man destroyed by senseless loss, then Mr. Burns represents something entirely different. He's the tragedy of a man so consumed by greed and cruelty that the entire town fantasizes about killing him. And in the summer of 1995, someone actually did it. Season 6, Episode 25, Who Shot Mr. Burns? Part 1 aired on May 21st, 1995. The second part aired as the Season 7 premiere on September 17th, 1995. Between those two dates, Fox ran one of the biggest television events of the decade, a genuine cultural phenomenon where the network asked America to guess who pulled the trigger. They offered a cash prize. People debated it at work, at school, at dinner tables across the country. It was the Simpsons version of Who Shot JR from Dallas. And the answer was the last person anyone expected. But let's back up, because understanding who shot Mr. Burns requires understanding just how badly Mr. Burns had earned that bullet. The crisis begins when Springfield Elementary strikes oil on its property. This should be the school's salvation. With that oil money, they could fund music programs, buy new textbooks, fix the crumbling building, maybe even give groundskeeper Willie a raise. But Mr. Burns sees the oil well and decides he wants it. He slant drills from the power plant, tapping into the school's oil supply and stealing it for himself. The school goes bankrupt. Principal Skinner has to lay off Willie and the music teacher. Bart's treehouse gets destroyed by the drilling operation. Moe's tavern is ruined when the drill punctures something beneath it. Burns doesn't care. He doesn't even pretend to care. When Smithers points out that he's crushed every enemy in town, Burns corrects him. He hasn't taken out his biggest enemy yet, the sun. His grand plan is to build an enormous disk that will block out sunlight over Springfield permanently, forcing every single resident to depend on his power plant for electricity around the clock. Even Smithers, the most loyal man in Springfield, draws a line. He tells Burns that blocking out the sun would kill all plant life, that owls would hoot constantly, that the town sundial would become useless. Burns fires him on the spot. Smithers, who has devoted his entire adult life to serving this man, gets thrown out like garbage for having a conscience. At an emergency town meeting, Mayor Quimby opens the floor. Nearly everyone in Springfield has a reason to want Burns dead. Bart's treehouse was destroyed. The school lost its oil money. Moe lost his bar. Grandpa Simpson lost his room at the retirement home. Homer is enraged because after 10 years of working for Burns, the old man still can't remember his name. Homer literally spray painted, "I am Homer Simpson" on Burns' office wall, and Burns still asked, "Who the devil are you?" At the town meeting, Burns reveals his sun-blocking device. The crowd is furious, and then someone pulls out a gun and shoots Charles Montgomery Burns. He staggers. He falls onto the town sundial. And the mystery begins. Part 2 is a full detective episode. The suspects include nearly every character in Springfield. Smithers had motive because Burns fired him. Homer had motive because Burns humiliated him. Grandpa had motive. Barney had motive. Willie threatened to kill Burns and maim Smithers in front of witnesses. Even Tito Puente, the Latin jazz musician, wrote a song about wanting Burns dead. The investigation narrows the suspects. Smithers initially confesses because he was drunk and had a blackout, but the timeline doesn't add up. He was actually home watching reruns of Pardon My Zinger when the shooting happened. The clues point in unexpected directions. Burns' position on the sundial, the hole in his suit, the letters S and W formed by his body and the dial, and then the reveal. The person who shot Mr. Burns was Maggie Simpson, the baby. Burns had tried to take candy from Maggie, literally. He attempted to steal a lollipop from a baby, and in the struggle, his holster pistol went off. Maggie, by some combination of accident and instinct, shot Springfield's most powerful man. The twist was genius and completely controversial. Some viewers were furious. They'd spent all summer theorizing about complex revenge plots and political conspiracies, and the answer was a baby with a gun. But that's exactly what made it work. The most evil man in Springfield was brought down by the most innocent, the guy who terrorized an entire town, who stole from children, who literally tried to blot out the sun, was defeated by a baby defending her candy. Burns' worst moment isn't getting shot. His worst moment is the revelation of just how many people in Springfield wanted him dead and how few were surprised that it happened. When the richest man in town gets gunned down at a public meeting and the only question is which one of us finally did it, that says everything about what kind of person you are. Burns survived the shooting, of course. He recovered and went right back to being the same greedy, callous, ancient monster he's always been. Because in Springfield, the villains don't learn lessons. They just keep going. Burns nearly destroyed all of Springfield, and it took a baby to stop him. But there's one Springfield resident whose obsession with destroying a 10-year-old boy makes Burns look like a saint. And his name is Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr., better known as Sideshow Bob. Sideshow Bob has tried to kill Bart Simpson more times than most people can count. He's been a recurring villain since season 1, and his murder attempts have ranged from elaborate to absurd. But the episode where Bart genuinely seems like he might not survive, the one where the comedy stops feeling like comedy and starts feeling like a horror movie, is season 5, episode 2, Cape Fear. It aired on October 7th, 1993, and it holds a 9.2 on IMDb. It's not just one of the best Simpsons episodes ever made. It's one of the most unsettling. The episode opens with Bart receiving threatening letters. Written in blood, real blood. The letters keep coming, shoved under the door, stuffed in the mailbox, delivered in increasingly aggressive ways. Bart is terrified. He's a 10-year-old boy who's being stalked, and nobody seems to take it seriously enough. Homer actually sent one of the threatening letters himself by accident, because Bart had written "wide load" on the back of Homer's pants, and Homer was annoyed about it. That letter was written in regular ink and said, "I kill you scum." Even in the middle of a genuine crisis, the Simpsons can't stop being the Simpsons. Meanwhile, at Springfield State Penitentiary, Sideshow Bob has a parole hearing. His lawyer presents Bob as a reformed man who deserves another chance at society. Selma Bouvier testifies against him, reminding the board that Bob tried to kill her on their honeymoon. Bob's lawyer asks the room if anyone else has wanted to kill Selma. Hands go up all over the room, including Selma's own sister, Patty, who explains that it's because Selma leaves the toilet seat up. The parole board has one concern. Bob has "Die Bart Die" tattooed across his chest. That seems like a red flag. Bob's explanation is delivered with the calm, cultured confidence that makes him such a compelling villain. He says it's German. "Die Bart Die." The Bart the? Nobody in the room speaks German well enough to challenge this, so they buy it. Bob walks free. Once Bob is out, the threat escalates immediately. The Simpsons go to the movies and discover that the obnoxious man in front of them, laughing loudly and blowing cigar smoke, is Sideshow Bob. He's stalking Bart openly. The family goes to the police, and Chief Wiggum makes the decision to place the entire Simpson family in the witness relocation program. They become the Thompsons and are moved to a houseboat on Terror Lake. There's a gag during the relocation that's become one of the most famous bits in Simpsons history. The FBI agent tells Homer that his new name is Mr. Thompson. Homer doesn't respond. The agent repeats it. Homer stares blankly. The agent actually gets down on the floor, points at Homer's feet, and says, "When I kick you, you say your name is Mr. Thompson." He kicks Homer. Homer says, "I think he's talking to you." It's hilarious, but underneath the comedy, there's a real tension. A family is being forced to abandon their home because a convicted felon is trying to murder their child. Of course, Bob follows them. He finds the houseboat. He gets on board. And while the rest of the family sleeps, Bob ties them all up. Homer, Marge, Lisa, Maggie, bound and gagged. And then Bob turns to Bart. This is the scene where the comedy disappears. Bob is standing over a 10-year-old boy with a knife. Bart's family is helpless. There's no one coming to save him. Bob has finally won. And Bart, in a moment of desperate brilliance, asks Bob for one final request before he dies. He asks Bob to perform the entire score of HMS Pinafore, the Gilbert and Sullivan operetta, all of it, and Bob does it. Because Sideshow Bob is above all else a performer. He can't resist an audience, even an audience of one terrified child. He sings the entire show, every aria, every chorus, every duet played by a single man performing all the parts. And while Bob sings, the houseboat drifts across Terror Lake, all the way back to Springfield, where it bumps into a dock and the police are waiting. Bob is arrested, Bart survives, and the audience laughs because the resolution is so absurd. But think about what actually happened in that episode. A child was hunted by a man who tattooed death threats on his own body. That child's family was tied up and helpless. And the only reason that child didn't die is because his would-be killer loves musical theater too much to skip a performance. If Bob had been any less cultured, Bart Simpson would be dead. That's Bart's worst external moment, the time someone else nearly destroyed him. But Bart's worst internal moment, the one that hits differently because it comes from inside, happens in Season 7, Episode 4. Bart sells his soul. It aired on October 8th, 1995. The setup is deceptively simple. Bart is at church with Milhouse, and on a dare, he writes Bart Simpson's soul on a piece of paper and sells it to Milhouse for $5. It's a joke. Bart doesn't believe in souls. He thinks the whole concept is made up to scare people into being good. So he trades his soul for $5 and thinks he's pulled off the greatest hustle of his life. Except things start going wrong immediately, and not in a dramatic, obvious way. In a quiet, creeping, deeply unsettling way. Automatic doors at the Quickie Mart won't open for Bart. They open for everyone else, but when Bart walks up, nothing happens. He breathes on a window, and his breath doesn't fog the glass. Lisa's cat, who normally ignores him, hisses and runs away. Animals sense something missing in him. Other kids laugh at jokes, and Bart can hear the laughter but can't feel it. He's physically present but spiritually absent, like someone scooped out the part of him that connects to the world and left the shell behind. The worst part is the nightmare. Bart has this recurring dream where all his friends and classmates are rowing boats across a beautiful sunlit river toward some kind of paradise. Everyone has a partner in their boat. Everyone is laughing and happy and headed somewhere wonderful. And Bart is alone in his boat, rowing desperately, but his boat won't move. The oars just splash uselessly in the water. He's sinking. The paradise gets further and further away. And he wakes up screaming. Bart tries to buy his soul back from Milhouse, but Milhouse already sold it to Comic Book Guy. And Comic Book Guy sold it to someone else. Bart's soul is bouncing around Springfield's economy like a baseball card, traded and retraded, and Bart can't track it down. He goes to Comic Book Guy's store and begs. He goes to Milhouse's house and pleads. Nobody has it. Nobody knows where it ended up. And then one night, Bart comes home and finds the piece of paper slipped under his bedroom door. Someone bought it and returned it to him anonymously. He picks it up and just holds it. And he starts crying, not cartoon crying with exaggerated tears and wailing. Real, quiet, relieved crying. The kind of crying you do when you thought you lost something forever and you got it back at the last possible moment. The camera pulls back to reveal Lisa walking away down the hallway, smiling. She bought it for him. His sister, the person who understands him better than anyone, spent her own money to buy back something she isn't even sure is real, because she could see that her brother was drowning without it. That episode asks a question that the show never definitively answers. Is the soul real? Did Bart actually lose something metaphysical? Or did his guilt and fear manifest as psychological symptoms? The beauty of the episode is that it doesn't matter. Whether the soul is literally real or just a metaphor for identity and connection, Bart lost it. He felt the absence in his bones, and the only person who cared enough to fix it was his 8-year-old sister. Bart learned the hard way that some things are worth more than $5. But his sister Lisa has faced her own devastating moments, ones that cut even deeper because Lisa Simpson sees the world more clearly than anyone else in Springfield. And the world she sees makes her want to stop looking. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old. She plays the baritone saxophone. She's a vegetarian, a Buddhist, an environmentalist, and a straight A student at a school that can barely afford chalk. She's the smartest person in her family by a significant margin, and possibly the smartest person in all of Springfield. And she has been dealing with clinical-level depression since the very first season of the show, Season 1, Episode 6, Moaning Lisa. This episode aired on February 11th, 1990, when the series was still finding its identity. And somehow, in those early rough animation days when the characters barely looked like themselves, the writers produced one of the most honest depictions of childhood depression that television has ever attempted. Lisa wakes up one morning and she's just sad. Not sad about something specific, not sad because something bad happened, just sad. A deep, heavy, unexplainable sadness that sits on her chest and makes it hard to breathe. She can't concentrate at school. She can't enjoy her music. She sits in her room staring at the ceiling while her saxophone gathers dust. When Marge asks her what's wrong, Lisa can't explain it. She doesn't have the words. She just knows that the world feels wrong and she doesn't know how to make it feel right again. Marge's first instinct is to do what a lot of parents do when they don't understand depression. She tells Lisa to smile, to push through it, to fake it until it becomes real. And Lisa tries. She goes to school with a plastered-on smile and responds to everything with exaggerated enthusiasm. She becomes a performing robot, going through the motions of happiness while feeling absolutely nothing. And Marge watches her daughter doing this and realizes immediately that she gave terrible advice. She goes back to Lisa and takes it all back. She tells her daughter to always be herself, to feel whatever she feels, and that Marge will be there no matter what. That scene, a mother admitting she was wrong and giving her child permission to be sad, was radical for a cartoon in 1990. It's still radical now, but the real emotional core of the episode is Bleeding Gums Murphy. Lisa sneaks out one night and finds him on a bridge, playing the saxophone in the dark. He doesn't ask her what's wrong. He doesn't try to fix her. He just plays. And Lisa plays along. Two people, decades apart in age, connected by music and loneliness. It's the first time in the episode that Lisa feels understood. Not happy, not fixed, just understood. And sometimes that's enough. Here's where it gets worse. Bleeding Gums, Murphy dies. Season 6, Episode 22. Round Springfield, he passes away in the hospital from an illness, and Lisa is the only person who really mourns him. The jazz community doesn't show up to his funeral. He doesn't have family. He spent his entire life playing music that nobody listened to. And when he died, a little girl was the only one who cared. Lisa can barely afford to buy his album at the record store. She has to convince the radio station to play his music as a tribute. She does all of this because Bleeding Gums Murphy was the one person who made her feel less alone in the world, and she refuses to let him disappear quietly. Think about what that means for an 8-year-old. Her one kindred spirit, the only adult who truly got her, is gone, and the world barely notices. Lisa's depression isn't a one-episode story. It comes back again and again throughout the series, manifesting in different ways. In one episode, she does a school report on what Springfield will look like in 50 years and becomes so overwhelmed by the environmental data that she delivers a speech so dark it horrifies her classmates. One kid literally jumps out a window screaming in terror. A concerned Marge takes Lisa to a counselor who diagnoses her with something called environment-related despair and puts her on antidepressant medication. The drugs work in the sense that they stop Lisa from being sad, but they also stop her from being Lisa. She sees smiley faces everywhere. She nearly kisses an electric fan because she sees it smiling at her. Marge takes her off the pills because being numb isn't the same as being okay. Then there's her body image. In season 16, episode 3, Sleeping with the Enemy, Lisa develops genuine anxiety about her weight after kids at school mock her. She starts restricting her eating. She starts looking at herself in the mirror with disgust. And the episode doesn't end with a clean, happy resolution. Lisa admits at the end that she still struggles with how she sees herself and that it might take years to get better. For a show that typically resets everything by the next episode, that admission hit different. The writers were acknowledging that some wounds don't heal in 22 minutes. And then there's the episode that fans generally consider the worst thing the show ever did to Lisa's character. Season 23, Episode 22. Lisa Goes Gaga. It aired on May 20th, 2012, and it holds the distinction of being the lowest rated Simpsons episode in the show's entire history, somewhere around a 3.9 to 4.5 on IMDb, depending on when you check. The premise is that Lady Gaga visits Springfield and uses her celebrity presence to cheer Lisa up. The problem isn't Lady Gaga herself. The problem is that Lisa Simpson, a character whose emotional complexity has been built over 2 decades, whose depression and loneliness and intellectual isolation have been treated with genuine care and nuance in episodes like Moaning Lisa and Around Springfield and Lisa's Substitute, has her entire emotional world reduced to a famous person showed up and made her feel better. Lisa's pain deserves more than a guest star hug. Her character had earned more than a celebrity intervention. And the fan community let the writers know it. Lisa Goes Gaga is consistently cited in polls and rankings as the worst Simpsons episode ever made. And the core complaint is always the same. You took the show's most emotionally rich character and treated her like a prop in someone else's spotlight. Lisa Simpson's worst moment isn't any single episode. It's the pattern. She's been depressed since she was 8. She's lost the only adult who understood her music. She's struggled with how she looks, what she eats, and whether the world will survive long enough for any of it to matter. She lives in a family that loves her but can't keep up with her. She goes to a school that bores her. She exists in a town that doesn't deserve her. And the show's answer, more often than not, is that Lisa just has to keep going. Keep playing her saxophone. Keep raising her hand in class. Keep being the smartest person in the room, even though nobody in the room appreciates it. That's her worst moment. Every day. Being Lisa Simpson in Springfield forever. Lisa sees the world too clearly for an 8-year-old. But her mother Marge has carried a different kind of burden. The weight of holding an entire family together when that family seems determined to fall apart. And while Marge's worst moments aren't as dramatic as some of the others on this list, they might be the most painfully relatable. Marge Simpson doesn't get shot by babies or stalked by convicted felons. Marge's worst moments are quieter than that. They're the kind of worst moments that happen to real people in real kitchens and real houses all across the country. And maybe that's why they sting the most. Start with season 6, episode 11, Fear of Flying. Marge develops a sudden and crippling phobia of airplanes. The family is supposed to take a vacation, and Marge can't get on the plane. She tries. She physically cannot do it. Homer, being Homer, suggests they just drive everywhere for the rest of their lives, which is a sweet gesture buried under a mountain of laziness. But Lisa convinces Marge to see a therapist, and what comes out during those sessions is genuinely dark. Marge's father wasn't a pilot, as she'd been told her whole life. He was a flight attendant, and her family was so ashamed of this that they lied to her about it for decades. The implication isn't subtle. In the world Marge grew up in, a man doing what was traditionally seen as women's work was so embarrassing that an entire family constructed a false reality around a little girl rather than let her know the truth. Marge's fear of flying isn't about planes, it's about the lies she was raised on. The therapy helps, sort of, but the episode ends with Marge's therapist admitting that they've really only scratched the surface and that Marge has many, many other issues that will require years of work. Marge smiles politely and says she'll think about it, which, if you know Marge, means she's going to bury it all and go back to cleaning the kitchen. Then there's the gambling. Season 5, Episode 10. Dollar burns, Springfield gets a casino, and Marge discovers slot machines. What starts as casual entertainment becomes a full-blown addiction. Homer finds her at the casino at 3 a.m, eyes glazed over, surrounded by empty cups of coffee, pulling that lever over and over again with the mechanical repetition of someone who has completely checked out of reality. She doesn't recognize Homer for a moment when he tries to talk to her. The show plays this straight. There's no cutaway gag, no funny aside, just a woman who has spent her entire adult life being responsible for everyone else finally finding the one thing that lets her stop thinking. And it's destroying her. The gambling addiction connects to something deeper about Marge's character. She is the load-bearing wall of the Simpson family. Homer doesn't cook, doesn't clean, doesn't pay bills on time, doesn't discipline the kids consistently, and occasionally disappears for days on some harebrained scheme. Bart is a constant source of chaos. Lisa needs emotional support that nobody else in the family can provide. Maggie needs constant supervision. And Marge handles all of it, every day, without complaint, without help, without anyone ever asking her if she's okay. In Season 15, Episode 10, Diatribe of a Mad Housewife, Marge writes a romance novel. The love interest is based on Ned Flanders, not because Marge has romantic feelings for Ned, but because Ned represents everything Homer isn't. Competent, attentive, reliable, present. Marge is so starved for basic consideration from her husband that she has to invent a fictional version of her neighbor just to imagine what it would feel like to be noticed. When Homer finds out about the novel and gets jealous, the irony is almost too much. He's threatened by a fantasy that exists solely because he can't be bothered to take out the trash without being asked 6 times. Marge's worst moment isn't one episode. It's every episode. It's the cumulative weight of 35 seasons of being the only adult in a household of children. It's the knowledge that if she stopped even for a day, the whole thing would collapse. And the cruel joke is that nobody in her family fully appreciates this. They love her, sure. Homer genuinely loves Marge. But love without effort is just a word. And Marge Simpson has been running on words and fumes since 1989. Now let's talk about a character whose worst moment became one of the most controversial decisions in Simpsons history. A decision so divisive that even the show's own creator has expressed regret about it. We're talking about Seymour Skinner, or should I say Armin Tamzarian. Season 9, Episode 2. The Principal and the Pauper. It aired on September 28, 1997, and the fan reaction was swift, loud, and overwhelmingly negative. Harry Shearer, who voices Skinner, has openly criticized the episode. Matt Groening himself has said he wished it never happened. And the reason is simple. This episode takes everything you know about Seymour Skinner and reveals it to be a lie. The setup seems innocent enough. Springfield Elementary is celebrating Principal Skinner's 20th anniversary. There's a party, there's a banner, Superintendent Chalmers is there. The whole community shows up to honor this quiet, rigid, slightly pathetic man who has dedicated 2 decades of his life to educating Springfield's children. And then a stranger walks through the door. A tall man in a military uniform who announces that he is the real Seymour Skinner. Our Skinner, the man we've known for 9 seasons, freezes, and then he confesses. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. He's an orphan from Capital City. A former street criminal who was headed for prison until a judge gave him a choice between jail, joining the military, or simply apologizing. Armin chose the military because he didn't know there was a war on. In Vietnam, Armin met the real Sergeant Seymour Skinner, who became his mentor. Skinner taught him discipline, gave him purpose, showed him how to be a decent person. But during a scouting mission, the real Skinner was captured and presumed dead. Armin went to Agnes Skinner's house to deliver the news. But when Agnes opened the door and saw a young man in uniform, she assumed he was her son. And Armin couldn't bring himself to correct her, so he became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the identity, the life. He became the principal of Springfield Elementary. He lived with Agnes. He built a 26-year existence on a lie. The real Seymour Skinner returns, having escaped from a labor camp. He takes over as principal. He tries to reconnect with his mother, but the real Skinner is rude, dismissive, and difficult. Agnes realizes she prefers the imposter who spent 26 years calling her mother over the biological son who treats her like a burden. The town, in a move that is either heartwarming or deeply disturbing depending on your perspective, forces the real Skinner onto a freight train, ties him to a chair, and sends him out of Springfield permanently. Judge Snyder issues a court order restoring Armin to the identity of Seymour Skinner and declares that no one shall mention the name Tamzarian again, under penalty of torture. The episode resets the status quo. Everything goes back to normal. But the damage to the audience's relationship with Skinner was real. For 9 seasons, viewers had built an emotional connection to a character with a specific backstory. His Vietnam service, his complicated relationship with his mother, his lonely, uptight, slightly tragic existence. And now all of it was fake. The Vietnam flashbacks were someone else's memories. The mother-son dynamic was built on deception. Even Skinner's personality, his rigidity, his rule-following, his desperate need for approval, could be reinterpreted as the behavior of an imposter terrified of being discovered. The controversy went beyond typical fan complaints. This was one of the episodes that critics point to as the beginning of the show's decline, the moment when the writers started prioritizing shocking twists over character consistency. Whether you think the episode is clever or destructive, one thing is undeniable. Seymour Skinner's worst moment was having his entire identity exposed as a fiction. And unlike most Simpsons controversies, this one never really went away. Over 25 years later, fans still bring it up. Even the show acknowledges it repeatedly. In a later episode, when Lisa names her cat Snowball II, despite it technically being Snowball V, Skinner questions her logic. Lisa's response is devastating. "I guess you're right, Principal Tamzarian." Skinner accepts it immediately and walks away. That single line, delivered casually in a completely unrelated episode, cuts deeper than the entire Tamzarian reveal, because it proves that even in a show that resets everything by the next episode, some wounds don't heal. Skinner's secret is out there, everyone knows, and every once in a while someone reminds him. Not out of cruelty, just out of the casual, offhand truth that Springfield specializes in. Skinner's entire identity was a lie, but at least he had people who wanted him back. The same can't be said for some of Springfield's loneliest residents, people who carry their pain in silence while the world ignores them completely. If you asked most casual Simpsons viewers to name the saddest character on the show, they'd probably say Lisa, or maybe Ned after Maude died. But people who really know the show, the ones who've watched every episode and paid attention to the background details, usually give a different answer. Moe Zeislak, the bartender, the guy behind the counter at Moe's Tavern pouring drinks for Homer, Lenny, Carl, and Barney, while his own life falls apart in slow motion and nobody thinks to ask if he's all right. Moe's loneliness isn't played as a background joke. It's a recurring, deeply uncomfortable theme that the show keeps returning to in ways that feel less like comedy and more like a cry for help. He's ugly. The show tells us this constantly. He knows he's ugly. Other characters remind him. He once got plastic surgery in season 11, episode 16, Pygmalion. And for a brief stretch of episodes, he looked handsome. He got a role on a soap opera. Women noticed him for the first time. He felt confident. And then his face reverted, back to normal, back to being Mo. The one beautiful thing in his life was temporary, and watching it disappear was worse than never having it at all. Mo has attempted suicide multiple times throughout the series. The show treats these moments with varying degrees of seriousness, sometimes playing them for dark humor and sometimes letting the silence linger just a beat too long. In one Treehouse of Horror episode's future flash sequence, an older Mo takes his own life. The show's writers have acknowledged that Mo is probably the most tragic character they've ever created. A man who wants nothing more than basic human connection and can never seem to hold on to it. His bar is the only constant in his life. Homer, Lenny, Carl, and Barney come in every day. They sit on those same stools. They drink those same beers. And Mo pours and listens and occasionally makes a sarcastic comment. But these men aren't really his friends, not in the way that matters. They mock him. They take his hospitality for granted. They never invite him to their homes or their family events. Mo is useful to them as a bartender. Beyond that, he's invisible. And then there are the prank calls. Bart Simpson has been prank calling Mo's Tavern since the very first season. Is there a Butts here? A Seymour Butts? And every time, Mo falls for it. He shouts the name across the bar, realizes he's been tricked, and screams threats into the phone. The audience laughs. It's a classic Simpsons bit. But when you think about it from Mo's perspective, a deeply lonely and depressed man is being repeatedly humiliated by a child for entertainment. The prank calls are cruelty disguised as comedy, and the fact that nobody in the bar ever tells Bart to stop, that nobody ever sticks up for Mo, says everything about his place in Springfield's social hierarchy. Mo Sislak's worst moment isn't a single episode. It's the cumulative realization that across 35 seasons and hundreds of episodes, nothing ever gets better for him. He never finds lasting love. He never finds lasting friendship. He never finds lasting purpose beyond standing behind a bar and serving drinks to people who wouldn't miss him if he was gone. The show acknowledges this. The writers know what they've created, and they keep writing him anyway because Mo represents something that comedy doesn't usually have the courage to look at directly. The person who falls through every crack in the social safety net. The person who everyone sees but nobody notices. The person who keeps showing up to work every day not because things are getting better, but because the alternative is being alone in a room with no one to pour for. Now let's talk about someone whose absence defined Homer more than their presence ever could. Homer's mother, Mona Simpson. Most people know Homer Simpson as a bumbling, lovable idiot who lives with his wife, his kids, and his dog on Evergreen Terrace. But there's a piece of Homer's backstory that the show has explored with surprising emotional depth, and it changes how you see everything about him. Homer's mother left when he was a child. She didn't die. She didn't abandon him in the traditional sense. She became a fugitive. Season 7, Episode 8, Mother Simpson. It aired on November 19th, 1995. And it's one of the few Simpsons episodes that critics, writers, and fans universally agree is a masterpiece of emotional storytelling. The episode reveals that Homer's mother, Mona, was a 1960s political activist who sabotaged Mr. Burns' germ warfare laboratory. Burns' lab was developing biological weapons, and Mona, along with a group of radicals, broke in and destroyed the operation. But she was identified, and the FBI put out a warrant for her arrest. Rather than turn herself in and go to prison, Mona went on the run. She's been living under assumed names, moving from city to city, hiding from federal agents for decades. Homer didn't know any of this. He was told his mother was dead. He grew up believing his mother died when he was young. He spent his entire childhood, his adolescence, his entire adult life, grieving a woman who was alive. She was out there, she was thinking about him, she just couldn't come home. When Homer discovers the truth and reunites with Mona, the scene is devastating. This is Homer Simpson, the man who buries every feeling under beer and donuts and television. the man who can barely express affection to his own children without making a joke. And when he sees his mother for the first time in decades, he falls apart completely. He cries in a way that Homer almost never cries. Not the exaggerated cartoon sobbing he does when his favorite restaurant closes. Real, deep, wrenching grief releasing all at once. The grief of a boy who grew up thinking his mother didn't love him enough to stay. But she can't stay now either. The FBI is closing in again. Agents are circling Springfield. And Mona has to leave, again. The final scene of the episode is one of the most famous endings in Simpsons history. Homer drives Mona to the town limits. She gets in her car. She drives away. And Homer sits on the hood of his car, alone staring up at the stars. There's no music, no jokes, no cutaway gag. Just Homer, sitting in silence, watching the sky, processing the fact that his mother came back into his life for one brief moment and then vanished into it again. Years later, the show revisits Mona one final time, season 19, episode 19. Mona Leaves. It aired on May 11th, 2008. Mona returns to Springfield for what she promises will be a permanent visit. Homer is overjoyed. He's going to have his mother back. Finally, after all these years, the family will be complete. And then Mona dies. Naturally, peacefully, in Homer's recliner. Homer wasn't there when it happened. He walks into the living room and finds her. Her final wish is for Homer to complete one last act of rebellion against Mr. Burns. Mona leaves instructions for Homer to launch a rocket containing an eco-friendly compound that will neutralize the pollution from Burns's power plant. Homer follows through, honoring his mother's dying wish by carrying out the kind of radical act she devoted her life to. And after the rocket launches, Homer sits on a hill, alone again, staring at the sky again, just like before. Homer Simpson's relationship with his mother is the emotional backbone of his entire character. His fear of abandonment, his desperate need to be liked, his tendency to hold his family too tight and too loose at the same time. All of it traces back to the woman who loved him enough to fight for a better world but couldn't stay in his. Every time Homer does something selfless, every time he puts his family first despite every instinct telling him to be selfish, there's a piece of Mona in that. She planted something in him before she left. And even though she could never come home, what she planted kept growing. Homer lost his mother twice. But some characters in Springfield were destroyed by a single moment they never saw coming. And sometimes the show's darkest moments aren't about death at all. They're about what happens when you discover something about yourself that changes everything you believed was true. We already talked about Sideshow Bob from Bart's perspective in Cape Fear. The terror of being hunted by a man who wants you dead. But now let's flip it. Because Sideshow Bob's story, when you look at the full arc across the entire series, is one of the most genuinely tragic character studies in animation. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. is a genius. He's classically educated. He can quote Shakespeare, perform opera, appreciate fine wine, and carry on sophisticated conversation in multiple languages. He earned a degree from Yale. He read Dostoevsky for pleasure. He is, by any reasonable measure, one of the most talented and cultured people in Springfield. And he has thrown every single bit of it away because he cannot stop trying to murder a 10-year-old boy. Think about that. Really think about it. Bob had everything: intelligence, education, talent, ambition. He could have been a professor, a performer, a politician, anything. And instead, he spent decades cycling in and out of prison because Bart Simpson exists. The obsession consumed his life the way addiction consumes an addict. Every time Bob gets out, he tells himself this time will be different. This time he'll move on. This time he'll build a life. And every single time, he ends up back in Springfield with a knife or a bomb or some elaborate Rube Goldberg machine designed to eliminate one specific child. The show follows this pattern through episode after episode, season after season. In Cape Fear, Bob stalks Bart to Terror Lake. In Sideshow Bob Roberts, he rigs a mayoral election. In The Italian Bob, Bart discovers Bob living peacefully in Italy with a wife and child, and the exposure destroys that life too. Every time Bob finds some measure of peace, the universe drags him back to his obsession. But the episode that really hammers home just how wasted Bob's life has become is Season 29, Episode 9, Gone Boy. It aired in the later seasons, and most casual viewers probably haven't seen it, but it might be the most devastating Sideshow Bob episode of them all. Bart falls down a manhole and ends up trapped in an abandoned underground missile silo. The whole town searches for him. And Sideshow Bob, who is out of prison on some kind of work release, finds himself in an unusual position. He's supposed to want Bart dead. He spent his entire adult life wanting Bart dead. But when he learns that Bart might actually be dead, something unexpected happens. He panics. He can't accept it. Not because he cares about Bart's well-being, but because if Bart is dead and Bob didn't do it, then what was the point of everything? The years in prison, the failed murder attempts, the ruined career, the destroyed marriage. If Bart just dies in a random accident, then Bob's entire life story becomes meaningless. Bob manipulates Milhouse into revealing Bart's location. He goes to the silo. He has Bart completely at his mercy, tied up, no escape. The moment he's been dreaming about for decades. And he can't do it. His prison therapist talks him through it, and Bob realizes that killing Bart wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't give him back his career or his family or his wasted years. It would just add another prison sentence to a life that's already been spent behind bars. Bob saves Bart and Milhouse. He disarms a missile that was accidentally triggered during the confrontation. And then he goes back to prison, because that's what happens to Sideshow Bob. Even when he does the right thing, he ends up back where he started. The episode's epilogue is the cruelest part. Years in the future, an elderly Sideshow Bob is living alone in a lighthouse. He's still obsessing over Bart. He writes, "Kill Bart" in the sand on the beach every day, and every day the tide comes in and washes it away. A mailman comments that Bob wouldn't have to listen to the old man's ranting if he'd just get a proper mailbox. And Bob considers it. The greatest villain in Simpsons history, reduced to a lonely old man on a beach, having the same useless thought over and over while the ocean erases it. That's not comedy. That's a Greek tragedy dressed in yellow. Now, speaking of Frank Grimes, his story didn't quite end at that funeral. Season 14, Episode 6, The Great Louse Detective brings Frank Grimes' son into the picture. Frank Grimes Jr. shows up in Springfield with one goal: kill Homer Simpson, avenge his father. And the twist that makes this episode so wonderfully dark is that the police bring in Sideshow Bob, of all people, to help identify and stop the would-be killer. Bob is considered the foremost expert on wanting to kill members of the Simpson family. Frank Grimes Jr. is everything his father was: hardworking, intelligent, and absolutely correct about Homer being a danger to everyone around him. He's also consumed by the same righteous fury that destroyed his father. The cycle of destruction that Homer leaves in his wake doesn't end with the victims. It passes to their children. Homer killed Frank Grimes by existing, and now Frank Grimes' son has inherited that legacy of rage. The episode resolves in the typical Simpsons fashion, with Frank Jr. getting arrested and everything returning to normal. But the subtext is bleak. Homer Simpson has ruined multiple generations of the same family simply by being himself. He doesn't know it, he'll never know it. And tomorrow he'll go right back to sleeping at his desk, while the nuclear plant slowly contaminates Springfield's water supply. Let's shift gears to one more Homer story before we move on. And this one is different from the others because it's not about Homer hurting someone else. It's about Homer confronting the thing that terrifies every human being who has ever lived: his own death. Season 2, Episode 11. One Fish, Two Fish, Blowfish, Bluefish. It aired on January 24th, 1991, when the show was still in its infancy. And it produced an episode that many critics consider one of the most emotionally mature half hours in the history of American animation. The premise is straightforward. Homer goes to a sushi restaurant for the first time. He orders fugu, which is Japanese blowfish. If prepared correctly, fugu is a delicacy. If prepared incorrectly, it's one of the most poisonous foods on the planet. The chef at the restaurant is distracted, a different cook prepares Homer's fish, and something goes wrong. Homer might have eaten a lethal dose of fugu toxin. Dr. Hibbert tells Homer that he has approximately 24 hours to live. Homer makes a list, things to do on his last day on Earth. He wants to listen to Lisa play her saxophone one final time. He wants to have a real, honest, man-to-man conversation with Bart, not about grades or behavior, just about life. He wants to make love to Marge one more time. He wants to record a video message for Maggie because she's too young to form memories and he wants her to know who her father was. He wants to tell off Mr. Burns. He wants to have one last beer with the guys at Moe's. He wants to eat one more meal that his mother would have been proud of. He doesn't accomplish everything on the list. He runs out of time. The day goes too fast. Some of the items get interrupted, some get rushed, some don't happen at all. And as the clock ticks past midnight, Homer sits alone in his recliner, listening to the Bible on tape, waiting to die. He falls asleep. He wakes up the next morning, he's alive. The fugu wasn't lethal. Homer Simpson is going to be fine, but the emotional damage is done. For 22 minutes, the audience had to sit with the genuine possibility that Homer Simpson was going to die. Not in a Treehouse of Horror segment. Not as a gag that gets reversed, for real. And in that time, we saw something we rarely see on this show. Homer being completely honest about who he is and what matters to him. He didn't want fame or fortune on his last day. He wanted to hear his daughter play music. He wanted his baby to know his face. He wanted one more night with the woman he loves. This was season 2, 1991. The animation was still rough. The characters were still being figured out, and the writers produced an episode that rivaled the emotional depth of any live-action prestige drama on television. One fish, two fish, blowfish, bluefish proved early and definitively that The Simpsons wasn't just a cartoon, it was a show about what it means to be alive, told through yellow people with 4 fingers. Homer survived his brush with death, but some characters in Springfield carry damage that no amount of time can heal. And the next story proves that sometimes the show's darkest moments aren't about villains or violence at all. They're about a kid who just wants to pass a test, and a man who discovers that his own brain has been sabotaging him since childhood. Season 2, Episode 1, Bart Gets an F. It aired on October 11th, 1990. And it's the most watched episode of The Simpsons ever. 33.6 million people tuned in, more than the Super Bowl that year, more than most live television events in the history of the medium. And what they watched wasn't an action-packed special or a celebrity stunt. It was a story about a kid trying to pass a history test. Bart is failing. Badly. He's on the verge of being held back a grade, which for a 10-year-old is basically a social death sentence. His teacher, Mrs. Krabappel, tells him that if he doesn't pass the next exam, he's repeating the 4th grade. His parents are worried. Lisa tries to help. Even Martin Prince, the class genius and Bart's natural enemy, agrees to tutor him. And here's what makes this episode different from every other Bart Gets in Trouble story. Bart actually tries. This isn't a con or a scheme or a clever workaround. Bart Simpson, the kid who prides himself on not caring about school, genuinely sits down and attempts to study. He asks for help, he takes notes, he reads the textbook, he prays for more time. And when a freak snowstorm cancels school, giving him an extra day to prepare, Bart doesn't go outside to play. He stays in and studies. Every other kid in Springfield is building snowmen and having snowball fights, and Bart is at his desk with a textbook. He takes the test. He hands it in. And he fails, a 59, 1 point below passing. Bart breaks down, right there in the classroom. He starts crying in front of Mrs. Krabappel. Not the performative crying he does when he wants something, real, ugly, hopeless crying. The kind of crying that comes from giving everything you have and being told it still wasn't enough. And through his tears, barely able to form sentences, he makes an offhand historical reference that demonstrates actual understanding of the material. He connects the weather outside to a historical event they studied, and for a moment his knowledge is real and spontaneous and genuine. Mrs. Krabappel recognizes this. She gives him 1 extra point for applied knowledge. Bart's grade goes from 59 to 60, a D-. He passes. Bart goes home and tapes the test to the refrigerator. He stares at that D- like it's a trophy. He has never been prouder of anything in his life. This is his ceiling, his absolute best after doing everything right, after studying harder than he's ever studied for anything, after praying and sacrificing and pushing himself to the breaking point, is a D-. And he's thrilled about it. That's Bart's worst moment, not because something bad happened to him, but because the episode reveals the truth that the show usually papers over with pranks and slingshots and eat my shorts. Bart Simpson is not stupid. He's a smart kid trapped in a system that was never designed for the way his brain works. He has a father who doesn't value education, a school that gave up on him years ago, a culture that rewards the Martins and ignores the Barts. And his absolute peak after genuine effort and real sacrifice is the lowest possible passing grade. The show is telling us something about class, about educational inequality, about the kids who fall through the cracks. And it's telling us through a cartoon about a spiky-haired troublemaker who just wanted to not be held back. Now let's talk about Homer's brain. Because Season 12, Episode 9, HOMR, takes everything we know about Homer's intelligence and reframes it as something genuinely tragic. The episode reveals that when Homer was a child, he shoved a crayon up his nose during a moment of curiosity. That crayon lodged itself in his brain. And it's been there ever since. For his entire life, this foreign object has been pressing against his frontal lobe, reducing his cognitive function. Homer's stupidity, the thing that defines him as a character, the thing that drives every plot and every joke, isn't natural. It's the result of a childhood accident that nobody caught. Doctors discover the crayon during a routine examination and remove it. And Homer wakes up smart, not just a little smarter, dramatically, fundamentally intelligent. He can hold conversations with Lisa about science and philosophy. He reads books and understands them. He appreciates art and music on a deeper level. For the first time in his life, Homer Simpson's brain is working the way it was always supposed to, and it makes him miserable, because the smarter Homer gets, the more clearly he sees his own life. He sees that his job at the nuclear plant is meaningless and dangerous. He sees that his friends at Moe's are drinking themselves to death and calling it fun. He sees that his marriage has survived not because of anything he's contributed, but because Marge is a saint who deserves better. He sees Springfield for what it really is, a dying town full of broken people held together by willful ignorance. The intelligence he's gained doesn't bring happiness, it brings clarity. And in Springfield, clarity is a curse. Homer makes a decision. He goes to Moe's tavern and asks Moe to help him shove the crayon back in. He's choosing to be stupid again. He's choosing ignorance over truth, comfort over awareness, happiness over understanding. And before Moe does it, before the crayon goes back in and Homer's IQ drops back down to where it's been for 40 years, Homer writes Lisa a letter. The letter says something along the lines of this: "I'm taking the coward's way out, but I want you to know that you don't have to. You're smart enough to handle what I can't. I hope you don't judge me. I love you, Dad." That letter is one of the most quietly devastating moments in the entire series. Homer knows he's making the wrong choice. He knows that choosing to be dumb again is choosing to be a worse father, a worse husband, a worse person. But he also knows that being smart in Springfield is a death sentence. Frank Grimes proved that. The smart man dies, the stupid man survives. Homer is choosing survival, and the only person he trusts to understand why is his 8-year-old daughter. Homi Erstwarar is the darkest commentary The Simpsons has ever made about American anti-intellectualism. The show is literally saying that in this country, in this culture, a man has to choose between being intelligent and being happy. And the system is designed so that those two things are incompatible. Homer with the crayon removed is who he was supposed to be. Homer with the crayon in is who he has to be. And the gap between those two Homers is the entire tragedy of the character condensed into a single object lodged in his skull. Now, before we wrap up this section, we need to talk about the episode that no longer exists. The one that was erased from official Simpsons history in a way that no other episode has ever been. Season 3, Episode 1, Stark Raving Dad. It originally aired on September 19th, 1991. Homer wears a pink shirt to work, gets committed to a mental institution, and meets a large white man named Leon Kompowski, who claims to be Michael Jackson. The episode was a cultural event. Michael Jackson himself voiced the character, though he was credited under the pseudonym John J. Smith due to contractual restrictions with his record label. Jackson reportedly loved The Simpsons and personally reached out to the show's producers about appearing. The episode featured original music and became one of the most beloved installments of the show's early years. For almost 3 decades, Stark Raving Dad was just another great Simpsons episode. Then, in 2019, HBO released Leaving Neverland, a documentary featuring allegations against Michael Jackson. In the aftermath, Simpsons showrunner Al Jean and executive producer James L. Brooks made an unprecedented decision. They pulled Stark Raving Dad from all official distribution, not just from reruns, from everything: syndication, DVD box sets, streaming platforms. The episode was removed from Disney Plus and has never been restored. It remains, as of 2026, the only Simpsons episode that has been completely and permanently banned from all official channels. The decision was controversial. Some praised it as a responsible moral stance. Others argued that erasing art doesn't erase the problems it's associated with. But regardless of where you stand on the issue, the cultural significance is undeniable. An entire generation's childhood memory, one of the show's most iconic early episodes, was officially declared too problematic to exist. Disney Plus launched a 24/7 Simpsons streaming channel that plays episodes on a continuous loop, and Stark Raving Dad is specifically excluded. You can watch 770 plus episodes of The Simpsons whenever you want, but not that one. That one is gone. Whether you think the ban was the right call or the wrong one, the fact remains that Stark Raving Dad represents something rare in television history. A beloved piece of popular culture that was retroactively removed from the canon by its own creators. Homer's adventure in the mental institution, his friendship with Leon, the songs they performed together, all of it officially wiped clean. Like it never happened. That's a different kind of worst moment. Not a character's worst moment, but the show's. The moment when The Simpsons looked at one of its own episodes and decided the world was better off without it. Speaking of characters whose pain gets hidden behind a performance, let's talk about Herschel Schmoikel Pinchas Yerucham Krastovsky. You know him as Krusty the Clown. Krusty is, on the surface, one of the funniest characters in The Simpsons. He's a children's entertainer. He has his own TV show, his own brand of merchandise, his own fast food chain. Kids across Springfield worship him, Bart especially. Krusty the Clown is Bart's hero, the one adult he genuinely looks up to and respects. And behind that grease paint and that big red nose is one of the most damaged human beings in the entire show. Krusty's backstory is established in Season 3, Episode 6, Like Father, Like Clown. It aired on October 24th, 1991, and it's essentially The Simpsons version of The Jazz Singer. Krusty was born into a deeply religious Jewish family. His father, Rabbi Hyman Krastovsky, was one of the most respected rabbis in Springfield. And when young Herschel told his father he wanted to be a clown, his father disowned him. Not figuratively, literally. Rabbi Krustovsky declared that his son was dead to him and cut off all contact. Krusty spent his entire career carrying that wound. He became one of the most famous entertainers in Springfield, but his father refused to acknowledge his existence. The man who makes children laugh every day on television goes home to an empty house, knowing his own father is ashamed of him. When Bart and Lisa learn about this, they launch a campaign to reconcile Krusty with his father, tracking down Rabbi Krustovsky and using philosophical arguments from the Talmud to convince him that comedy can be a form of bringing joy to God's creation. It works. Father and son reunite. And for once, a Simpsons story has a genuinely happy ending. But that happiness doesn't last. In season 26, episode 1, Clown in the Dumps, Rabbi Krustovsky dies. The episode aired on September 28, 2014, and it was promoted with the teaser that a beloved character will die. Fans speculated for months about who it would be. The answer was Krusty's father, the one person who finally accepted Krusty after decades of rejection. Gone. And here's what makes Krusty's story so tragic beyond the family drama. Krusty is terrible at being Krusty. His show is declining. His merchandise is cheap garbage that falls apart. His Krusty Burger restaurants serve food that could probably be classified as a public health violation. He doesn't read the scripts for his show. He doesn't know the names of the kids who watch him. He's a terrible role model and an even worse businessman. But he keeps going. He keeps putting on the makeup. He keeps doing the show, because without the clown, there is no Krusty. There's just Herschel, a lonely man in a big house who was never good enough for his father, even after they reconciled. Krusty's worst moment is the realization that everything he built, the fame, the fortune, the Krusty empire, was built to fill a hole that his father's rejection created. And even after that hole was patched, the structure remained hollow. Now let's talk about the character who communicates the least but might understand the most. Maggie Simpson. Maggie doesn't speak, she sucks on a pacifier. She toddles around the house, causing minor chaos and occasionally doing things that are frankly impossible for a baby. She shot Mr. Burns. She's escaped from the Ayn Rand School for Tots. She's driven cars and fought off one-eyebrowed babies in homage to action movies. Maggie Simpson is, depending on the episode, either a helpless infant or a tiny action hero. But her worst moment, the one that defines her character more than any gunshot or car chase, is revealed in one of the most beautiful episodes the show has ever produced. Season 6, Episode 13, And Maggie Makes 3. It aired on January 22nd, 1995. The episode is a flashback. Homer tells the kids the story of how Maggie was born. And the truth is harder than anyone expected. When Marge got pregnant with Maggie, Homer had just achieved his dream of quitting the nuclear power plant to work at a bowling alley. He was happy. Genuinely, completely, blissfully happy for the first time in his adult life. He had a job he loved, enough money to pay the bills, and no Mr. Burns screaming at him. Life was perfect. And then Marge told him she was pregnant. Again, a third child they couldn't afford. And Homer had to give up the bowling alley and go crawling back to Mr. Burns at the nuclear plant, begging for his old job. Burns gave it to him, but not without rubbing it in. He installed a plaque in Homer's workstation that reads, "Don't forget, you're here forever." A daily reminder that Homer's dreams died the day he had to come back. That plaque is Maggie's worst moment, even though she wasn't even born yet when it was hung. She's the reason Homer gave up the one thing that made him happy. She's the unexpected pregnancy that ended the best chapter of her father's life. And even though Homer loves Maggie, even though he would do it all again, the math is right there on the wall. Don't forget, you're here forever. But the episode saves itself with one of the most iconic visual reveals in television history. The camera pulls back to show Homer's workstation, and we see that he's placed Maggie's baby photos over the plaque. strategically positioned so that the visible letters no longer spell, "Don't forget, you're here forever." They now spell, "Do it for her." Homer didn't destroy the plaque. He didn't ignore it. He recontextualized it. He turned Mr. Burns's cruel reminder into something beautiful. The reason he's stuck at the power plant isn't punishment, it's purpose. Every day when Homer sits at that console and stares at that wall, he sees his daughter's face. And that's enough. That moment is why Maggie's worst moment is also her best. She's the reason Homer can't leave. And she's the reason Homer doesn't need to. Let's move on to another character whose real-life circumstances made their Simpsons departure genuinely heartbreaking. Edna Krabappel. Mrs. Krabappel was Bart's fourth-grade teacher for over 2 decades of the show. She was sarcastic, chain-smoking, perpetually exhausted, and one of the most realistic depictions of a public school teacher that animation has ever produced. She dealt with Bart's pranks, Principal Skinner's incompetence, and Springfield's complete indifference to education with a weary resilience that felt authentic in a way most cartoon characters don't. Edna was voiced by Marcia Wallace, who brought a specific warmth and weariness to the character that no one else could have replicated. Wallace was perfect for the role because she understood what it meant to be a person who started out with ideals, and slowly, over decades of being ground down by the system, settled into a kind of affectionate cynicism. Edna didn't hate her students. She had just given up on the idea that she could save them. There's a difference, and Wallace understood that difference. In later seasons, Edna and Ned Flanders began a relationship. It was an unlikely pairing: the rigid, devout Christian widower and the sarcastic, secular teacher. But it worked precisely because it was unexpected. They brought out different sides of each other. Ned loosened up a little. Edna found someone who actually cared about her. The fan community voted to keep them together in an interactive episode event, and their relationship became a genuine bright spot in the show's later years. Then Marcia Wallace died. On October 25, 2013, she passed away from pneumonia and other health complications. She was 70 years old, and the show made the decision to retire Edna Krabappel permanently rather than recast her. In season 25, episode 3, the couch gag featured Bart writing on the chalkboard, "We'll really miss you, Mrs. K." It was a tribute not just to the character but to the woman who gave her life. Edna's death was confirmed in-universe in a later episode, though the details were kept vague. Ned Flanders was shown as a widower for the second time. Another wife gone, another empty chair at the table. The man who lost Maude to a t-shirt cannon now lost Edna to something the show couldn't even name, because naming it would have required acknowledging a real person's death in a cartoon world, and the writers were too respectful for that. Marcia Wallace's passing meant that Edna Krabappel would never again tell Bart to stay after class. Never again share a cigarette break with Skinner in the teacher's lounge. Never again roll her eyes at another parent-teacher conference. The show lost a character, but more than that, it lost a voice. And some voices, once they're gone, leave a silence that nothing else can fill. While we're talking about characters who faced their worst moments in ways that challenged who they fundamentally were, there's an episode from Season 8 that deserves attention. Season 8, Episode 15, Homer's Phobia. It aired on February 16th, 1997, and at the time, it was one of the most controversial things the show had ever done. The episode introduces John, a vintage store owner voiced by filmmaker John Waters. Homer immediately likes John. They bond over kitsch and pop culture. John becomes a regular visitor at the Simpson household. Everyone adores him. And then Homer discovers that John is gay. Homer's reaction is immediate, visceral, and ugly. He panics. He forbids John from coming to the house. He becomes convinced that Bart is going to turn gay because of John's influence. He drags Bart on a series of increasingly desperate outings designed to make his son more masculine. He takes him to a steel mill, which turns out to be entirely staffed by gay men who transform the factory into a dance club after hours. He takes him hunting for reindeer, which goes horribly wrong when the reindeer attack the hunters. Throughout the episode, Homer's homophobia is presented as what it is: irrational fear wrapped in ignorance. The climax comes when Homer, Bart, Moe, and Barney are cornered by angry reindeer at a Christmas tree farm. They're in genuine danger, and the person who saves them is John, who uses a Japanese novelty whistle to drive the reindeer away. Homer is forced to confront the fact that the man he's been afraid of, the man he tried to keep away from his family, is the reason they're still alive. Homer's worst moment in this episode isn't the homophobia itself, though that's bad enough. It's the realization that he almost lost his relationship with a good person because of fear. John was kind, funny, generous, and brave. Homer nearly threw all of that away because he couldn't handle a man being attracted to other men. And the show never lets Homer completely off the hook. His acceptance at the end of the episode is grudging and conditional. He agrees to tolerate John, not because he's overcome his prejudice, but because John saved his life. It's honest, ugly, and honest. Homer's phobia won a GLAAD Media Award in 1997 for its portrayal of a gay character, and it remains one of the show's most critically praised episodes. But it's also a reminder that Homer Simpson, for all his lovable qualities, carries the casual bigotries of his upbringing. He's a product of his environment, and sometimes his environment produces things that are genuinely harmful. We've covered the Simpson family, we've covered their friends and enemies and neighbors. But there's one more character in The Simpsons whose worst moments deserve attention, and that character is Springfield itself. Springfield, the town, has a complicated relationship with the Simpson family. It needs them and resents them in equal measure. And in one of the show's most ambitious later season episodes, the town finally said enough. Season 23, episode 14, At Long Last Leave, marked the show's 500th episode. It aired on February 19th, 2012, and it's the episode where Springfield kicks the Simpsons out. The premise is both ridiculous and strangely logical. The townspeople hold a secret meeting to vote on expelling the Simpson family from Springfield. Everyone voted yes. The reasoning is that the Simpsons have cost the town a fortune over the years. Homer's recklessness has caused nuclear meltdowns and property damage. Bart's pranks have resulted in countless emergency responses. Lisa's environmental crusades have been expensive and annoying. Even Maggie shooting Mr. Burns gets brought up. Mayor Quimby lays out the case, and the math doesn't lie. The Simpson family is a net negative on Springfield's economy and quality of life. When the Simpsons discover the meeting by accident, the town doesn't even try to soften the blow. They hold a formal exile ceremony. The family is paraded out of town while the residents celebrate. Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, and Maggie drive off into the unknown with all their possessions stuffed into their car. The only person who tries to defend them is Ned Flanders, and even he gets shut down immediately. The family ends up at a commune of off-the-grid outlaws called the Outlands. And something interesting happens. Homer, Bart, Lisa, and Maggie all adapt immediately. They thrive. The anarchic, rule-free environment actually suits them better than the structured mediocrity of Springfield. Bart can be as wild as he wants without consequences. Lisa finds an intellectually stimulating community. Homer discovers he's actually useful when there's no bureaucracy to navigate, but Marge can't adjust. Because Marge needs structure, she needs her kitchen and her routine and the familiarity of a life she's built over decades. She gets homesick for a place that literally voted to get rid of her. That's the cruelty of it. Springfield didn't want the Simpsons, and Marge can't stop wanting Springfield. Eventually, Homer sneaks Marge back into town for a visit. The other Springfieldians decide the Outlands look fun and move there too. And things work out because this is still The Simpsons and the status quo must be preserved. But the emotional core of the episode is that moment at the exile ceremony. 3,500 people, give or take, people the Simpsons have known for 23 years, standing in a room and unanimously agreeing that the world would be better without them. Even for a comedy, that's cold. Now let's rewind to one of the show's most physically brutal moments. Season 2, Episode 8, Bart the Daredevil. It aired on December 6th, 1990, and it gave us the Springfield Gorge. Bart becomes obsessed with motorcycle daredevil Lance Murdoch after watching him perform death-defying stunts at the Springfield Speedway. Inspired by Murdoch's bravery, or more accurately, by a 10-year-old's inability to distinguish courage from stupidity, Bart announces his plan to jump Springfield Gorge on his skateboard. Homer, in one of his rare moments of genuine parental responsibility, physically stops Bart from making the jump. He tackles his son at the edge of the gorge and tells him, in no uncertain terms, that this is too dangerous. It's a touching scene, Homer being a dad, Homer putting his child's safety first, Homer doing the right thing for once, and then Homer accidentally gets on the skateboard himself. He rolls toward the gorge. He can't stop. And he goes over the edge. What follows is one of the most iconic visual gags in Simpsons history, and also one of the most viscerally painful. Homer doesn't make it across the gorge. He gets about 2/3 of the way and the skateboard's momentum dies. He hangs in the air for a moment, Wile E. Coyote style. And then he falls. He doesn't just fall once, and he bounces off the rocky cliff face on the way down. Every impact is accompanied by a sickening thud. He hits a jutting rock, bounces off, hits another one, bounces off, all the way down. When he finally reaches the bottom of the gorge, broken and bleeding, a rescue helicopter arrives to airlift him to the hospital. The paramedics strap him to a stretcher, load him into the helicopter, and the helicopter crashes into the cliff on the way up. Homer tumbles all the way back down the gorge, hitting every single rock again. The scene is simultaneously hilarious and horrifying. On one level, it's brilliant physical comedy. The timing, the escalation, the repeated punishment, it's pure cartoon slapstick. But on another level, Homer just fell several hundred feet, suffered what would be fatal injuries for any real human being, and then suffered those same fatal injuries a second time. His body was destroyed, repeatedly, and the paramedics who were supposed to save him only made it worse. That scene has been reused and referenced multiple times throughout the series, including callbacks where an ambulance passes the gorge, and Homer's body is still there from a previous attempt. The Springfield Gorge incident became a cultural touchstone, one of those moments that anyone who grew up in the 90s can describe in detail even if they haven't watched the episode in decades. Before we continue deeper into Springfield's darkest corners, we need to pause and acknowledge two characters who are no longer with us. Not because the writers decided to kill them off, but because the man who brought them to life was taken from the world. Phil Hartman, he voiced Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz, two of the most beloved recurring characters in Simpsons history. Troy McClure, the washed-up actor whose introduction always began with, "You may remember me from such films as," followed by increasingly absurd movie titles. Lionel Hutz, the incompetent lawyer whose legal strategy seemed to consist entirely of lying and hoping for the best. Both characters were perfect vehicles for Hartman's unique comedic talent, that smooth, confident, slightly oily charm that made everything he said sound simultaneously trustworthy and suspicious. Phil Hartman was murdered on May 28, 1998. He was 49 years old. Rather than recast Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz, the show's producers made the decision to retire both characters permanently. They have never appeared again in any new episodes. Their absence is felt in every episode that could have used a shady lawyer or a fading celebrity. The show lost two of its most versatile recurring players, and it lost them not through a creative decision, but through a real-world tragedy that no amount of comedy could soften. There was talk, in the years before Hartman's death, of giving Troy McClure his own spin-off series. A live-action movie was discussed. Phil Hartman was excited about the possibility of bringing Troy to a wider audience, of exploring what made this washed-up actor tick beyond his 2-minute Simpsons appearances. None of that happened. All of those possibilities died on that night in May 1998 in a bedroom in Encino, California. The world lost a comedian, The Simpsons lost two of its best characters, and the audience lost something they didn't even know they had until it was gone. Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz exist now only in reruns in the early seasons, in the episodes that Phil Hartman recorded before that night in 1998. And every time you hear, "Hi, I'm Troy McClure" during a rewatch, there's a layer of sadness underneath the laughter that wasn't there when it first aired. Now we've been talking about the regular Simpsons universe, canon episodes, things that really happen in the world of Springfield. But some of the show's most disturbing moments exist outside of canon in the annual Treehouse of Horror Halloween specials. And while these episodes technically don't count as part of the show's continuity, some of them are so dark that they deserve mention. Treehouse of Horror 5 from Season 6, Episode 6 aired on October 30th, 1994. It holds a 9.2 on IMDb, making it one of the highest-rated episodes in the show's entire run, Halloween or otherwise. The third segment of that episode is called Nightmare Cafeteria. The premise is straightforward. Springfield Elementary runs out of money for both food and detention space. Principal Skinner finds an elegant solution. He starts feeding the students to each other. It starts subtly. A student named Utter disappears. Skinner explains it away. The cafeteria suddenly has excellent German sausage on the menu. Then Jimbo disappears. Then others. One by one, the problem children vanish and the lunch options improve. Bart and Lisa realize what's happening. They try to escape. They try to warn people. Nobody believes them. And the episode ends with the remaining students being chased into a giant blender by the faculty, screaming as they're processed into tomorrow's lunch. Yes, it's a Treehouse of Horror segment. Yes, it's non-canon. Yes, it's played for dark comedy. But the image of children being systematically consumed by the adults who are supposed to protect them is disturbing on a level that transcends its comedic framing. The segment is a satire of institutional failure, of budget cuts in education, of a system that views children as problems to be managed rather than people to be nurtured. And the fact that it's funny doesn't make it less unsettling. If anything, the comedy makes it worse. Because you're laughing at children being eaten, and the show knows you're laughing, and it's making you uncomfortable about laughing. The shinning segment from that same episode parodies Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, with Homer going insane and trying to murder his family with an axe after Mr. Burns cuts off the beer supply and the television reception at his winter lodge. Willie dies trying to save the family 3 times in 3 different segments. Every time he bursts through a door screaming, "I'll save ye," he gets axed in the back. It's a running gag about a man dying repeatedly while trying to do the right thing. And by the 3rd time, you're not sure whether you're laughing at the repetition or cringing at the futility. Treehouse of Horror episodes have gotten progressively darker over the years. Later installments feature Homer replacing death itself, Lisa becoming a serial killer with a split personality, the entire population of Springfield being turned into Homer clones through a radioactive virus, and social media literally spawning monsters that destroy civilization. The Halloween episodes function as a pressure valve for the writers, a space where they can explore the worst-case scenarios for every character without being bound by continuity. And in that space, free from consequences, the show reveals what it really thinks about the world it's created. Springfield isn't just a funny town where funny things happen to funny yellow people. It's a town where the nuclear plant is always leaking, the police are incompetent, the politicians are corrupt, the schools are failing, and the only thing keeping society from complete collapse is the stubbornness of ordinary people who refuse to stop showing up. The Treehouse of Horror episodes strip away the comedy safety net and show you what Springfield would actually look like if the rules stopped applying. And the answer, more often than not, is a nightmare. Let's come back to the real world of Springfield for a moment, because there's a character we haven't discussed yet whose worst moment is one of the most depressing things the show has ever depicted: Barney Gumble. Barney was Homer's best friend in high school, and if you've only ever seen him as the belching, stumbling drunk who haunts Moe's Tavern, you're missing the full picture. Because Barney Gumble wasn't always like that. The show reveals through flashbacks that young Barney was intelligent, ambitious, and headed for great things. He had a scholarship. He had a future. He had everything going for him. And then Homer gave him his first beer. It's presented as a casual moment. Homer hands Barney a duff during a party. Barney takes a sip. And that's it. That single sip redirects the entire trajectory of his life. Barney becomes an alcoholic. He loses his scholarship. He loses his ambition. He loses everything except his bar stool at Moe's Tavern. The transformation isn't instant in the show's timeline, but the cause and effect is clear. Homer introduced his best friend to alcohol, and alcohol consumed everything Barney could have been. In season 11, episode 18, Days of Wine and Doses, Barney gets sober. He switches to coffee. He gets a helicopter pilot's license. He becomes productive and alert and genuinely functional. For a few glorious episodes, Barney Gumble proves that the drunk at the end of the bar was always a capable, talented person hiding beneath the addiction. And then, inevitably, he falls off the wagon. The show returns him to his default state. Drunk, belching, lost. Barney's worst moment is the same as Barney's every moment. He's an alcoholic living in a town where his best friend is the person who started his addiction, where his primary social environment is a bar, and where nobody seems particularly interested in helping him stay sober. Moe serves him drink after drink. Homer sits next to him and enables the behavior. The town has simply accepted that Barney Gumble is a drunk, the way you accept that the sky is blue or that the sun rises in the east. It's a fact of life. Nobody questions it. Nobody intervenes. Barney just sits on his stool and drinks, and the world moves around him like water around a rock. Let's talk about Milhouse Van Houten, because Milhouse's worst moment is arguably every moment he's ever been conscious. Milhouse is Bart's best friend, which sounds like it should be a good thing. It's not. Being Bart's best friend means being Bart's sidekick, his fall guy, his scapegoat, and his punching bag whenever anyone better comes along. Milhouse gets bullied by Nelson. He gets ignored by Lisa, who he's been in love with since childhood. His parents' marriage fell apart in one of the show's more realistic divorce storylines, with Kirk and Luan Van Houten splitting up in season 8, episode 19, A Milhouse Divided. The episode presents their divorce through the eyes of their son, who watches his family disintegrate while the adults around him pretend everything is fine. Milhouse's father Kirk is a failure by almost every conventional measure. He loses his job, his wife, his house, and his dignity in a single episode. He records a pathetic single called Can I Borrow a Feeling? And tries to sell it to his ex-wife's new boyfriend. Kirk Van Houten is what Homer Simpson would be without Marge's stabilizing presence. He's the cautionary tale that Homer somehow keeps avoiding. And Milhouse has to watch all of this. He shuttles between two households, neither of which feels like home. He clings to Bart because Bart is the only constant in his life, even though Bart treats him terribly. He chases Lisa because Lisa represents everything he wants and can never have: intelligence, confidence, purpose. And every time Milhouse gets close to something good, it falls apart. Girls leave him, friends abandon him. The universe seems to have a personal vendetta against Milhouse Van Houten. There's an episode where Bart goes missing and the whole town assumes he's dead. Milhouse finds out where Bart is but doesn't tell anyone because he's enjoying the attention Lisa gives him while she's grieving. Think about what that means. Milhouse is so starved for love and connection that he would rather let his best friend be presumed dead than give up the only attention he's ever gotten from the girl he loves. That's not funny. That's the behavior of a person who has been emotionally neglected to the point of sociopathy. And the show treats it as a joke because Milhouse is always the joke. Then there's Ralph Wiggum, Chief Wiggum's son, The kid who eats paste and talks to invisible friends and says things like, "I bent my Wookiee and my cat's breath smells like cat food." Ralph is treated by the show and by most viewers as comic relief. The lovable idiot, the kid who's so dumb it's endearing. But here's the thing about Ralph that nobody likes to think about too hard. Ralph might have a genuine developmental disability. His behavior, his inability to understand social cues, his disconnection from the reality that other characters inhabit, these aren't just quirky personality traits. In a real-world context, Ralph would be a child who needs support, therapy, maybe specialized education. Instead, he's in a mainstream classroom with a teacher who doesn't have the resources to help him, a father who alternates between overprotective and negligent, and classmates who either ignore him or mock him. In Season 4, Episode 15, I Love Lisa, Ralph develops a crush on Lisa after she gives him a Valentine's card out of pity. He's so unused to kindness that a single act of obligatory friendship sends him into a spiral of romantic obsession. When Lisa finally tells him on live television during Krusty's show that she doesn't like him, Ralph's heart visibly breaks. You can actually see the moment it happens. Bart rewinds the tape in slow motion and identifies the exact frame where Ralph's spirit dies. You can actually pinpoint the second when his heart rips in half. That scene is played for laughs. It has been memed and quoted and referenced for decades. But strip away the comedy, and you have a lonely, probably disabled child experiencing the purest form of romantic rejection on public television while the studio audience laughs. Ralph didn't do anything wrong. He liked a girl who was nice to him. He doesn't understand that the Valentine was pity, because Ralph doesn't understand pity. He just knows that someone was kind to him once, and then that kindness was taken away. And the show immortalized his pain as a punchline. Springfield is a town full of people like this. People whose suffering is funny until you think about it too hard. People whose worst moments are disguised as comedy because comedy is how Springfield copes with the fact that nothing ever gets better. Let's talk about one more thing before we wind down. Because The Simpsons has developed a reputation over the years for something that goes beyond entertainment. The predictions. The show has, through sheer volume and willingness to satirize everything, managed to accidentally predict an astonishing number of real-world events. In Season 11, Episode 17, Bart to the Future, which aired on March 19, 2000, the show depicted a future where Donald Trump had been president of the United States. This was 16 years before Trump's actual election in 2016. In 1998's When You Dish Upon a Star, the show depicted 20th Century Fox as a division of Walt Disney Company, which became reality in 2019. They've predicted smartwatches, video calls, autocorrect failures, and various political developments with eerie accuracy. Now, the honest truth is that most of these predictions are coincidences. When you produce over 700 episodes that satirize every aspect of modern life, you're going to hit the target occasionally just through sheer volume of jokes. The show's writers have said as much. They weren't psychics. They were comedy writers who happened to aim at the right absurdities. But the prediction phenomenon speaks to something deeper about The Simpsons and its relationship with American culture. This show has been running since 1989. It's seen the fall of the Berlin Wall, the rise of the internet, the September 11th attacks, the 2008 financial crisis, the smartphone revolution, the streaming wars, a global pandemic, and the election of a reality television star to the highest office in the land. The Simpsons has been the background music of American life for over 35 years. It's not just a show anymore, it's an institution, a cultural constant, a mirror that America has been staring into since the first Bush administration. And throughout all of that history, all of those cultural shifts and technological revolutions and political upheavals, the Simpson family has remained fundamentally the same. Homer still works at the plant. Marge still keeps the house running. Bart still rides his skateboard. Lisa still plays her saxophone. Maggie still sucks her pacifier. Springfield still has the same corrupt mayor, the same incompetent police chief, the same evil billionaire running the power plant. The show has been renewed through season 40. It will almost certainly run past that. These characters, these yellow people with 4 fingers and overbites, have been alive longer than most of the people watching them. They were here before most of their current audience was born, and they'll probably be here after some of their current audience is gone. That's not comedy. That's legacy. And it carries a weight that the show's creators probably never anticipated when they drew a short cartoon about a dysfunctional family for the Tracy Ullman Show back in 1987. So after everything we've covered tonight, what have we learned? What do all these worst moments add up to? Homer Simpson destroyed Frank Grimes by simply existing. He killed Maud Flanders through sheer carelessness. He chose to make himself stupid because intelligence was too painful. He lost his mother twice and never stopped staring at the sky. Ned Flanders buried his wife because of a t-shirt cannon and kept going to church anyway. Mr. Burns tried to block out the sun and got shot by a baby. Sideshow Bob wasted a brilliant life chasing a child he could never catch. Bart sold his soul for $5 and learned it was worth everything. Lisa saw the world too clearly and the world punished her for it. Marge held everything together and nobody thought to ask if she needed help. Skinner's whole identity was a lie. Moe has been alone since the first episode and will be alone in the last. Mona Simpson loved her son too much to stay and too much to forget. Krusty built an empire to fill a hole his father carved. Maggie cost Homer his dream and became his reason for living. Edna Krabappel lost her voice when the real world took it. Phil Hartman's characters will never speak again. Barney had his future stolen by a single beer. Milhouse is still waiting for someone to choose him first. And Ralph Wiggum just wanted someone to be nice to him on Valentine's Day. These aren't just cartoon moments, they're reflections of real human pain, filtered through yellow skin and exaggerated features and jokes that make you laugh before you realize they've made you sad. The Simpsons has survived for over 35 years, not because it's funny, though it is. It's survived because underneath every punchline there's something true, something uncomfortable. Something you recognize from your own life, or your own family, or your own town. Springfield is every town. The Simpsons are every family. And their worst moments are, in one way or another, ours too. But before we close the book on tonight's journey through Springfield's darkest chapters, there are a few more stories that deserve to be told. Characters who carry their pain quietly, moments that didn't make the headlines but cut just as deep. Groundskeeper Willie, the Scottish janitor at Springfield Elementary. He's been scrubbing floors, clearing snow, and being verbally abused by Principal Skinner for decades. Willie is one of those characters who exists on the margins of every episode. He's always there, always working, always being ignored, and his backstory, when the show bothers to explore it, is genuinely bleak. Willie came to America from Scotland with nothing. He's been working at the school for years with almost no pay, living in a shack on the school grounds that barely qualifies as shelter. When budget cuts hit, Willie is always the first to go. When praise is handed out, Willie is always the last considered. He's strong enough to wrestle wolves and angry enough to terrify anyone who crosses him, but underneath the rage is a man who just wants to be respected for the work he does. In the Treehouse of Horror, 5 segments, Willie dies 3 separate times trying to save the Simpson children. Each time he bursts through a door, announces that he's coming to rescue them, and immediately gets an axe in the back. 3 different segments. 3 different axes. The joke is the repetition. But the subtext is that Willie is the only adult in Springfield who consistently tries to protect children, and he gets punished for it every single time. His relationship with Principal Skinner is particularly cruel. Skinner treats Willie like a servant, not an employee. He dismisses Willie's opinions, mocks his accent, and takes his labor for granted. When Skinner needs dirty work done, Willie does it. When the work is done, Skinner pretends Willie doesn't exist. It's a class dynamic that the show acknowledges through comedy but never actually resolves. Willie will always be the janitor, Skinner will always be the boss. And the hierarchy will never change because Springfield runs on the same unspoken class system that runs the real world. Willie's worst moment isn't dramatic, it's structural. He's trapped in a job that doesn't value him, in a country that barely acknowledges him, working for people who would replace him in a heartbeat if they could find someone cheaper. He's the immigrant story that doesn't have a happy ending, the working class hero who never gets the hero treatment. And because he's a minor character in a comedy, his suffering is played for laughs that he never gets to share. Let's talk about one more thing that's often overlooked when people discuss the darkest moments of The Simpsons. The way the town collectively treats certain characters as disposable. Hans Moleman is a running joke about death. He's been killed in dozens of episodes, crushed, burned, drowned, run over, dropped from heights, buried alive, and dissolved in acid. Each time he reappears in the next episode with no explanation. The joke is that Hans Moleman cannot stay dead. But the joke underneath the joke is that Hans Moleman is a tiny, fragile, elderly man who nobody in Springfield cares about enough to protect. He's invisible, he's expendable. And his repeated deaths are funny specifically because the audience has internalized the idea that some people don't matter enough to mourn. That's dark. That's really dark, and the show knows it. The writers have acknowledged that Hans Moleman functions as a commentary on how society treats its most vulnerable members. The homeless, the elderly, the forgotten. Moleman exists so the show can kill him over and over, and each death is a tiny mirror reflecting how casually we look away from suffering that doesn't affect us personally. Similarly, Gil Gunderson, voiced as a homage to Jack Lemmon's character in Glengarry Glen Ross. Gil is a perpetual failure. Every job he takes ends in disaster. Every sale he tries to close falls apart. He's been fired from more positions than most people will hold in a lifetime. He lives in his car. He begs for scraps of opportunity and gets shut down every time. And the town finds this funny. Characters actively enjoy watching Gil fail. They invite him to things just to see him embarrass himself. There's an episode where Gil finally closes a big sale and gets a promotion and a nice house. And Homer accidentally destroys all of it because he can't mind his own business. Gil's worst moment is that the universe is specifically designed to prevent him from succeeding. It's not random bad luck, it's targeted. The Simpsons version of fate has decided that Gil Gunderson will never win. And every time he gets close, the cosmic rug gets pulled. That's not just comedy, that's cruelty with a laugh track. There's something important happening beneath all of these worst moments, something the show has been saying since 1989 that we're only now, after 35 years, starting to fully understand. The Simpsons isn't really about a family in a small town, it's about systems. It's about the systems that trap people in cycles of poverty, ignorance, addiction, and abuse. It's about the systems that reward the Homers and punish the Grimeses, that protect the Burnses and exploit the Willies, that turn the Barneys into drunks and the Millhouses into doormats and the Ralphs into punchlines. Every worst moment we've covered tonight isn't just a character failing or a storyline going dark. It's the show pointing at something real and saying, look at this. Look at what happens when the systems break down. Look at what happens when nobody takes responsibility. Look at what happens when a town runs on apathy and calls it community. Homer's ignorance isn't just funny, it's what happens when education fails an entire generation. Bart's D- isn't just a grade, it's the ceiling that poverty and dysfunction create for kids who deserve better. Lisa's depression isn't just sadness, it's the cost of being perceptive in a world that rewards obliviousness. Marge's exhaustion isn't just tiredness, it's what happens when an entire household puts its weight on one person and never thinks to share the load. The Simpsons has been telling us this for over 3 decades. through humor, through absurdity, through yellow cartoon people who live in a town called Springfield, which could be any Springfield in any state in America. The show's greatest trick isn't its comedy. It's that the comedy makes you comfortable enough to hear truths you'd reject if they were delivered straight. A sugar-coated pill of social commentary that goes down smooth and then sits in your stomach for years. Think about it. No other animated show has tackled gun ownership, gay rights, immigration, religious hypocrisy, corporate greed, environmental destruction, addiction, mental health, educational inequality, police incompetence, media manipulation, and the death of the American dream, all while making you laugh hard enough to snort milk out of your nose. The Simpsons does all of that, has been doing all of that, since before most streaming services existed, since before the internet was a thing most people used, since before cell phones fit in your pocket. And the worst moments are where those truths hit hardest, because in those moments, the comedy pulls back just enough for you to see the real people underneath the cartoon. The grieving widower, the lonely bartender, the abandoned son, the overlooked mother, the gifted child nobody listens to, the janitor nobody thanks, the alcoholic nobody helps, the old man nobody mourns. These characters have been with us for 35 years. Some of them were here before we were born. Some of them will be here after we're gone. And in all that time, across all those episodes, through all those worst moments, they've been doing something that great art has always done. They've been showing us ourselves. Not the version we want to see, the version that exists, the version that falls down the Springfield Gorge and hits every rock on the way down. The version that writes deceased on a form to avoid a medical bill and accidentally breaks the concept of death. Wait, that's Family Guy. Scratch that last one. The point is this. The Simpsons has earned its worst moments. It's earned the right to make you laugh, and then, when you're not expecting it, make you feel something real. That's what 35 seasons gets you. Trust. The audience trusts the show enough to follow it into dark places because they know the show will bring them back out with a joke, a song, or Homer falling asleep at exactly the wrong moment. But we're not quite done yet. There are a few more dark corners of Springfield that need light. The relationship between Homer and Bart is one of the most complicated father-son dynamics in television history. We've talked about Homer's failings as a person and Bart's struggles as a student. But the space between them, the way they interact as father and son, contains some of the show's most disturbing and most tender moments. Homer strangles Bart. This is a running gag that's been part of the show since season 1. Bart does something annoying, Homer wraps his hands around Bart's neck, and Bart's eyes bulge out while Homer screams, "Why, you little..." It happens so frequently that it barely registers as violence anymore. It's just a thing that happens on The Simpsons, like the couch gag or the chalkboard writing. But in 2024, a season 35 episode appeared to reference the strangling gag in a way that suggested the show might retire it. Executive producer James L. Brooks firmly denied any change, saying, "Don't think for a second we're changing anything." The strangling stays, and yet the fact that the conversation happened at all says something about how our understanding of that gag has evolved over 3 decades. In 1990, a cartoon father strangling his cartoon son was absurdist slapstick. In 2024, after decades of increased awareness about child abuse and domestic violence, the same gag carries different weight. Homer's strangling of Bart is the show's most visible example of normalized violence. It happens in front of Marge, who occasionally objects but never seriously intervenes. It happens in front of Lisa and Maggie, who have grown up watching their father assault their brother. It happens in front of neighbors, friends, and strangers, none of whom call the authorities. Springfield has collectively decided that Homer choking his son is just something that happens, like bad weather or potholes. In Season 4, Episode 14, Brother from the Same Planet, the Homer-Bart dynamic reaches its ugliest point. Homer forgets to pick Bart up from soccer practice, not by a few minutes, by hours. Bart sits alone at the field, waiting, watching other kids get picked up by their parents until it gets dark and he's the only one left. When Homer finally remembers and shows up, he doesn't apologize. He barely acknowledges what happened. Bart is so angry that he imagines Homer's face melting off his skull. The animation in that fantasy sequence is genuinely unsettling. This isn't Bart's usual mischief or rebellion. This is rage. The kind of rage that a child feels when the one person who's supposed to protect them and show up for them consistently fails to do either. Bart signs up for a Big Brother program and gets a replacement father figure. Homer, feeling rejected, signs up as a Big Brother himself and gets a replacement son. And instead of either of them addressing the actual problem, the neglect, the disappointment, the broken trust, they just start competing with each other for who can have the better fake family member. That episode asks a question the show usually avoids. What if Homer isn't just a lovable doofus? What if he's actually a bad father, not evil, not malicious, just consistently, thoroughly, reliably bad at the one job that matters more than any other? The answer the show gives, as always, is complicated. Homer loves Bart. He genuinely does. But loving someone and being good to them aren't the same thing. And Bart Simpson has spent his entire fictional life learning that lesson the hard way. Speaking of children being let down by adults, Season 8, Episode 17, My Sister, My Sitter, puts Lisa in one of her most nightmarish situations. Homer and Marge hire Lisa, who started a babysitting business, to watch Bart and Maggie while they go out for the evening. Bart is outraged that his younger sister has authority over him and dedicates the entire night to making her life a living hell. He refuses to eat dinner. He acts like a baby, smearing food everywhere, which causes Maggie to cry. He feeds Maggie coffee ice cream, which sends her into a caffeine-fueled frenzy. He orders outrageous things by phone under Lisa's name. He makes increasingly unreasonable demands designed specifically to push Lisa past her breaking point. And it works. Lisa loses control of the situation. Bart ends up injured, falling down the stairs after their physical confrontation. Lisa panics. Instead of calling for help, she tries to move Bart's unconscious body to the hospital using a wheelbarrow. She's spotted by neighbors. The police get involved. Lisa is accused of child abuse. She's the responsible one, the rule follower, the good kid, and she ends up looking like a violent babysitter who nearly killed her brother and tried to dump his body. The episode is meant to be funny. There's physical comedy and absurd escalation in the typical Simpsons chaos. But strip away the comedy and you have a story about a young girl who is given responsibility she didn't ask for, sabotaged by her own brother, and then blamed by society when everything goes wrong. Lisa did everything right. Bart made it impossible for her to succeed, and the adults around her judged her for the outcome without understanding the circumstances. If that's not a metaphor for how society treats women and girls, I don't know what is. There's one more visual from The Simpsons that belongs in any conversation about the show's darkest moments, and it comes from Season 4, Episode 10, Lisa's First Word. The episode is a flashback to 1984, when the Simpson family was younger and Bart was about to become a big brother. Homer, in a well-meaning but spectacularly misguided attempt at parenting, builds Bart a new bed so that baby Lisa can have the crib. The bed Homer builds is shaped like a giant clown. If you grew up watching The Simpsons, you remember what happens next. Little Bart lies in his new bed, staring up at the enormous clown face looming over him. The room is dark. The clown's painted grin catches the light. And then the clown speaks. "If you should die before you wake," followed by a horrifying laugh that echoes through the bedroom. Cut to little Bart shivering on the living room floor in the middle of the night, rocking back and forth, repeating a single phrase. "Can't sleep, clown'll eat me. Can't sleep, clown'll eat me." That image became iconic. It's been referenced, parodied, and memed for over 30 years. But the reason it resonates isn't because it's funny, it's because it captures something deeply true about childhood fear. The feeling that the adults in your life have no idea what terrifies you. Homer thought he was being a good father. He built his son a bed with his own hands. And the thing he built became the source of his son's nightmares. That's parenthood in a nutshell, trying your best and accidentally creating the monster under the bed. The clown bed is Homer and Bart's entire relationship compressed into a single object. Love and negligence, effort and obliviousness. A father who cares but doesn't understand, and a son who's terrified but can't explain why. It's funny because it's a cartoon clown. It's devastating because it's real. Speaking of lasting images, there's one more that's worth mentioning as we wind down for the night. The ending of And Maggie Makes Three, which we talked about earlier. Homer taking those photos of Maggie and placing them over Mr. Burns's cruel plaque. Do it for her. That image has transcended the show. It exists as a standalone piece of cultural art. You see it on refrigerators and office walls and tattoos. People who have never watched a single episode of The Simpsons know that image and feel something when they see it. Because it's not really about Homer or Maggie or Mr. Burns. It's about the reason anyone gets up in the morning and goes to a job they hate. It's about the thing that makes the unbearable bearable. It's about love being strong enough to rewrite misery into meaning. Homer didn't get the life he wanted. He got something better. He got a reason. And that might be the most Simpsons thing of all. A man stuck in a dead-end job at a dangerous factory, working for a boss who literally tried to block out the sun, finding his reason to keep going in 3 photographs of a baby he can't afford. It's funny, it's sad, it's true, it's The Simpsons. There's one more conversation we should have before wrapping up. And it's about a worst moment that happened outside the show in the real world and fundamentally changed how people relate to one of its longest-running characters, Apu Nahasapima Petalon, the Quick E-Mart owner. For decades, Apu was one of The Simpsons' most popular supporting characters. He was voiced by Hank Azaria, a white actor performing an exaggerated Indian accent, and for most of the show's run, nobody questioned it. Apu was just another Springfield resident, running his convenience store, overcharging for expired products, working insane hours, raising 8 children with his wife Manjula, and delivering his catchphrase, "Thank you, come again," with the kind of infectious energy that made him a fan favorite. Then in 2017, comedian Hari Kondabolu released a documentary called The Problem with Apu. The film argued that Apu's portrayal was a harmful stereotype that South Asian Americans had spent decades being mocked and reduced to a caricature because of one cartoon character's accent and mannerisms. The documentary featured Indian American actors, comedians, and writers describing how Apu had been used as a weapon against them in schools and workplaces. How kids shouted, "Thank you," come again at them. How casting directors expected them to sound like Apu. How a cartoon character had become the primary lens through which an entire ethnicity was viewed by mainstream American culture. The show's initial response was dismissive. In season 29, episode 15, which aired in April 2018, Lisa breaks the fourth wall and essentially tells the audience that some issues are too complicated for a cartoon to address. She looks directly at the camera and shrugs. The backlash to this response was enormous. Critics accused the show of trivializing legitimate concerns about representation and racial stereotyping. What followed was more significant. In January 2020, Hank Azaria announced he would no longer voice Apu. He'd been thinking about it for years, he said, and had come to understand the harm the character caused. The show hasn't recast Apu. He's been quietly phased out of new episodes, one of the most recognizable characters in Simpsons history, a fixture since the earliest seasons, essentially disappeared because the real world caught up with a joke that had been running for 30 years. Apu's worst moment isn't an episode. It's the realization that a character millions of people loved was simultaneously a source of pain for billions of others. that laughter and damage can coexist in the same catchphrase, that a show as smart as The Simpsons could be blind to its own biases for 3 decades. The Apu situation proved that even the most self-aware comedy on television has blind spots, and sometimes those blind spots are shaped exactly like the people you're making fun of. The show is still wrestling with this. White actors no longer voice non-white characters on The Simpsons. Carl Carlson was recast. Dr. Hibbert was recast. The changes are real, but Apu remains in limbo. Not present enough to offend, not absent enough to be forgotten. He exists in a strange middle ground between legacy character and cultural liability. And his story isn't over. It probably won't be for a long time. All of this, every worst moment, every dark episode, every character destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed again, happens inside a show that was originally meant to be a series of short sketches on The Tracy Ullman Show in 1987. Matt Groening drew the characters in the lobby of James L. Brooks' office because he didn't want to give up the rights to his Life in Hell comic strip. He named them after his own family: Homer, Marge, Lisa, Maggie. He named Bart as an anagram of brat. He drew them in minutes, rough sketches that would become one of the most enduring creations in entertainment history. Those rough sketches have generated a billion-dollar merchandising industry. They've inspired theme park attractions at Universal Studios in both Florida and Hollywood. They've produced a feature film that grossed over $500 million worldwide. They've been renewed through season 40, guaranteeing their presence on television well into the late 2000s and 20s. Doe has been added to the Oxford English Dictionary. Ambigun and cromulent, words invented by the show, have made it into real dictionaries. The show has been called by multiple linguists and cultural commentators one of the greatest sources of modern English idioms, rivaling Shakespeare and the Bible for cultural reference density. That's what those rough lobby sketches became. Not just a show, a language, a shared cultural vocabulary that connects generations across continents. When someone says, "worst episode ever" in comic book guy's voice, everybody knows what they mean. When someone says "excellent" while pressing their fingertips together, everybody pictures Mr. Burns. When someone says "Doe," everybody hears Homer. The Simpsons didn't just reflect American culture, it shaped it. And its worst moments, the ones we've spent the last 2 hours exploring together, are part of that shaping. They taught us that comedy can be sad, that cartoons can be honest, that a yellow man with a beer in his hand can break your heart if the writing is good enough. If you're still awake, thanks for sticking around for over 2 hours of Springfield's darkest secrets. If you fell asleep somewhere around Frank Grimes getting electrocuted, honestly, that's probably the healthiest response. The real world will be here when you wake up. And unlike Springfield, it occasionally learns from its mistakes. Sweet dreams. Don't let the clown bed eat you. And if you happen to wake up at 3 in the morning and find yourself thinking about Frank Grimes or Maud Flanders or that little piece of paper with Bart's soul written on it, just remember this. The Simpsons isn't trying to make you sad. It's trying to make you feel. And feeling, even the uncomfortable kind, is what separates Springfield from the towns that only exist in 2 dimensions. Springfield has 3. The third one is the one that hurts. One more thing before I let you go. If there's a character in The Simpsons whose worst moment we didn't cover tonight, and I know there are dozens, drop it in the comments. Tell me which one hits you the hardest. Tell me which scene you still think about when you can't sleep. Tell me which cartoon moment made you feel something you weren't expecting to feel. Because that's what makes this community special. We don't just watch The Simpsons, we feel it, we carry it with us. We quote it to each other like scripture and argue about it like theology. And the worst moments, the ones that really get under your skin, those are the ones that prove the show is more than entertainment. It's art. 35 years of art drawn in yellow and voiced by 6 people sitting in a recording studio in Los Angeles, creating a world that somehow feels more real than the one outside your window. If you enjoyed this, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. We've got more deep dives coming, more lore breakdowns, more characters to explore. The Simpsons has 700 plus episodes, and we barely scratched the surface tonight. The stories we didn't get to, the secrets we didn't uncover, the worst moments we had to leave on the cutting room floor, those are waiting for the next video. So hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling me which character's worst moment hit you the hardest, and I'll see you in the next one.